However, literally days before recording for this video, word spread that Square Enix had filed trademarks for Chocobo GP and Chocobo Grand Prix in a few different countries. Don't know what will become of this, or how soon we'll see anything become of this, but it seems like we could potentially see a new Chocobo racing game in the future. And I'm down for that. Well, here we go again. So I'm just going to get straight to the point. I didn't like Chocobo GP. Now granted, I'll admit that I only sunk in about 8 hours into the game, and given its live service structure, it's definitely expected to have more playtime than that. But in that time, I completed the story mode on both normal and expert difficulty, and got a few hours into the online tournament mode, which is where the game wants you to be primarily playing. And that covers most of what this game has to offer. So with all that in mind, I once again say, I didn't like Chocobo GP. And that's really a shame because I was excited for this one. I reviewed the original Chocobo Racing last year and enjoyed it quite a bit. And around that time, trademarking for Chocobo GP had begun circulating. And sure enough, at a Nintendo Direct 6 months later, in comes Chocobo GP, seemingly keeping a lot of what made the original game stand out for me, while also adding more iconic Final Fantasy characters, including my boy Vivi! Now admittedly, in the time between that announcement and the game's launch, some details about the game started to pop up that were concerning, to say the least. The gameplay videos circulating showed a rather slow-paced game, which as we later found out was the game on its beginner speed, so bullet dodged there. And shortly before launch, a Battle Pass system was revealed with mention of unlocking the Battle Pass with Mithril. Oh great, there's gonna be microtransactions, isn't there? But even with those in mind, I was willing to give the game a go. Maybe the game itself would still be fun to play, but sadly, that wasn't the case. And the presence of the microtransactions and live service elements just made it worse for me. But let's not get ahead of ourselves and cover these one at a time. I started my playthrough with the story mode, so we'll start there. Oh, and while the game doesn't have a super deep narrative or anything, I will still be talking about story spoilers, so spoiler warning for those who want it. The game's story centers on a racing tournament hosted by a Moogle known as Racing Hero X, who promises a single wish to whoever wins the tournament. This attracts the attention of Chocobo and Mog, in this game known as Atla, as well as many other characters throughout the story, and they all collectively and gradually make their way to the location of the tournament, bringing it to the attention of others they come across in the process. Going in, it was public knowledge that the game's story had something to do with a racing tournament, so I assumed that all the races you partook in within the story mode would be occurring as part of the tournament. In reality, the actual tournament only occurs once you're at chapter 7 of the story. Thus, this is one of those games where literally anything and everything is solved with the method of gameplay. A behemoth causing a ruckus for people living in the area? Race him to get him to stop. A royal captain trying to arrest a child for being sold a fraudulent ticket? Race the captain to get him to stand down. Two people trying to manipulate a father to keep custody over his daughter? Race to help the father get his daughter back. I'm not making any of this up. Despite the potential severity of that last scenario I listed, the game's story goes for a more lighthearted comedic tone, similar to that of the original game. And to give this game some credit, there are the occasional bits that do actually work, whether it be callbacks or references to the series as a whole, such as when Sid makes a comment about how he's always so old when he makes an appearance, I see what you did there, or just standalone jokes, like when Asura tries to figure out how she's gonna get into the tournament when she doesn't have a vehicle, so her solution is to turn her husband Leviathan into a car. Sure, it's ridiculous, but honestly kind of funny with how it's executed. Not every joke lands, though. There's a lot of fourth wall breaking humor, which is something the original did a fair amount as well, so that makes sense, though most of it in this game's case isn't executed all too well. And there's a specific recurring joke that I think the game thought was a lot funnier than it actually is. So throughout the game, Gilgamesh shows up as a recurring opponent, serving under Racing Hero X. And in every encounter with him after the first one, the cast collectively pretends they've forgotten who he is, much to his annoyance. And I mean the whole cast. Every single character in the party gets a chance to ask, "Who are you?" every single time. It's alright the first time it's used, even the second time, but they do this bit, no joke, 5 times throughout the game. They even recycle specific dialogue during some of these repeats.
Impossible! Don't tell me you've already forgotten. We fought mano a mano, but just the other day. Impossible! Don't tell me you've already forgotten. We fought mano a mano, but just the other day. Impossible! Don't tell me you've already forgotten. We fought mano a mano, but just the other day.
Though on the topic of Gilgamesh, I did want to briefly go into how the game handles the mainline title characters it uses. Most of the story's cast are Chocobo spin-off characters and original characters, but there are a few characters from some of the mainline titles. Alongside Gilgamesh, there's Terra and Maduin from Final Fantasy VI, and Vivi and Steiner from Final Fantasy IX. And the way they're all portrayed is bizarre. Terra's mostly okay, though they really oversimplify her personality. But as for Majuin, this all-powerful Esper is now a bumbling worrywart of a father. Like, what? Vivi and Steiner at least have their personalities intact, and they do fit in the Chocobo universe relatively well. However, for some reason, the game tries to incorporate elements of their personal arcs into their exchanges. And given how heavy FF9's themes get, I don't think these tonally fit into this game. Like at one point, Vivi out of nowhere drops his existential line from FF9 and just, it doesn't fit at all in this context? Granted, yes, Atla does make light of this, but I'm sorry, self-awareness to it not fitting doesn't change the fact that it doesn't fit. I don't know, maybe I'm just looking too deep into all this, but it bugged me regardless. The sad part is, they actually had an opportunity to incorporate another mainline character that would have fit in pretty perfectly. But not only did they not go through with that, they basically parade around the fact that they didn't go through with that. I'll explain what I mean. At the start of the game, Racing Hero X is contacted by some mysterious being and lets them reside within him, with this being taking control of Racing Hero X and puppeteering him into doing all this racing tournament stuff. In other words, this mysterious being is the game's main villain. In reality, the tournament's a means to trap a ton of people in the Rift, like the Rift from Final Fantasy V. You can even see X-Death's tree in the background. And at this point, I was like, wait, we're in the Rift from FF5, and Gilgamesh was serving as an underling to this villain, like in FF5. Is X-Death gonna be the one behind this? Given how cartoonishly evil X-Death is, this would have been a perfect fit, to be honest. But instead, the mysterious being is a brand new villain named Necroshell, who doesn't show up in the flesh until right before the final race, and is, to put it bluntly, incredibly boring. But here's the worst part. Even though they don't use X-Death, they sure do take a lot from him, not even with just being in the Rift or having Gilgamesh as an underling. For one, Necroshell almost introduces himself as what I presume would have been Neo X-Death.
Nay, I am Necroshell.
And on top of that, several of Necroshell's lines of dialogue are word for word taken from X-Death in Final Fantasy V.
Gilgamesh! What is all? When will I banish you from this dimension?
All memories, dimensions, existence, all that is shall be returned to nothing. Then I too can disappear. Forever!
They even have his "the laws of the universe mean nothing" line show up at the end of the Rift scene. Like, if you're gonna take all these plot beats and dialogue from X-Death, just use X-Death at that point.
You think he might be dead?
And even worse, the game openly jokes about this.
That wasn't even an original line.
Your self-aware cheekiness is not as funny as you think it is, game. But yeah, the story is... It's got its moments here and there, and the voice performances for the most part are pretty good. Christina V in particular is clearly having a lot of fun as Racing Hero X.
When you need him, he's there. Whistling the tune, he's there. With eyes gently sparkling. Behind his dashing goggles, nobody knows who he is. But everybody knows his name.
Oh, hey, it's Racing Hero X.
Ah! You interrupted me at the most important part, Cobalt!
But even as something not to be taken too seriously, I think it kind of misses the mark. I don't want this review to be continuous compare and contrast, but I do feel the original game handled this kind of story better. Also, this happened during one of the cutscenes.
What do you want us to do?
But that's enough about the story, let's get to the gameplay now. Chocobo GP at its core is a pretty standard kart racer. 8 racers, 3 laps around a track, pick up and use items against your opponents, and just win the race. Of course, like most kart racers, there's more to it than just that, and like its PS1 predecessor, Chocobo GP has 2 key gameplay mechanics: the Magicite system, and character abilities. In the original PS1 game, how the former worked is that, instead of traditional item boxes, magic spell stones would be on the track to pick up, with the magic spells serving as your power-ups. However, if you picked up more of the same spell stone before using the spell, that spell would upgrade, with 3 tiers of power for each spell. Fire, Fyra, Faraga, for example. It's similar to what Diddy Kong Racing did, but additionally, you could carry multiple spell stones at once. However, if you picked up a different spell stone between 2 of the same, the 2 spell stones that were the same wouldn't fuse. There was a unique sense of strategy in power-up collection and usage in Chocobo Racing. It was cool. And on top of that, before each race, you'd equip an additional special ability to your racer that you can use throughout the race. These could range from a super boost, to instant upgrading of one of your spells, to stealing someone else's spell stone, and it added to the strategic feel of the game. Now Chocobo GP does have both of these mechanics, but both have been altered quite a bit. Starting with the character abilities, each character has their own ability that's bound to them and them alone, and they mostly boil down to either a super attack or a super boost. I do kinda miss the way the original did it, but I do understand this new direction. It helps balance the abilities a bit more, some were definitely clearly better than others in the original, and adds something else to consider when selecting your character, which I do think works. Now the Magicite system, on the other hand, went through a more notable reworking. At its core, it works the same way. Collect multiple of the same spell, that spell will upgrade. However, instead of hitting specifically labeled magic stones, the Magicite pickups are traditional random item boxes. So when I first started playing Chocobo GP, I felt that this new power-up system was a notable downgrade, that there was less strategy with it being fully randomized instead of having the specifically labeled spell stones. But the more I played and the more I thought it all over, the more that this new system made sense to me. For one, the original did have randomized spellstone pickups alongside the more specific ones, so it's not like this was an entirely foreign concept for this mechanic. Granted, yes, there was still technically more strategy with the more specific pickups, but second, with just how many more power-ups are present in this game compared to the original, having them laid out in the original style probably would have been a lot harder to balance. And lastly, while it's not as clear as in the original, there is actually a form of strategy still present. See, there's 3 different colors of item boxes: red, blue, and yellow. The red and blue ones will give you a single spell, like Fire, while the yellow ones will give you a spell at its second tier of power, like Fyra. However, if you hit the blue item box while you're holding a spell, and presuming you have an item slot still open, that'll upgrade the spell. So say for example, you have Fyra. Hit the blue item box, it'll become Faraga. Now granted, as far as I recall at least, the game itself doesn't explain this at all, so it was kinda confusing initially. But all things considered, it's not a bad alternative way to execute this. Though what doesn't work in its favor is the item RNG. There doesn't seem to be a ton of consistency with what items you get and when depending on your placement. Something else I do like about the item system though is the spells themselves. Many of the ones from Chocobo Racing are carried over, but there are a couple new ones, with the most notable, and in my opinion the most creative, being the swap spell. When you use this spell, a portal will appear in front of you for you to drive into, and depending on what tier the spell is, it'll teleport you a certain distance. Pretty straightforward. 2 catches though. 1, anyone can drive into the portal and use it, so using this can potentially help your opponents as well. But also, 2, the point of exit can also be driven into, and if you do, you get warped back to where the starting portal was. That is a really creative spin on this kind of power-up, I really like it. So overall, while I feel like these mechanics were more interestingly executed in the original, the way they're treating this game isn't too bad, so it may sound like this game's pretty good. The big problem with the gameplay for me though is the feel of it all. The physics, the controls, stuff like that. The game felt very sluggish in that regard, making the general driving not very satisfying. Even the sense of speed isn't really there, despite the game going at a pretty decent pace. Well, on master speed at least. Beginner speed is a slog. But where it really felt sluggish was in the drifting. The drifting works the same way as it does in more recent Mario Kart games, but it definitely felt off compared to those games. And on several tracks, the drift was incredibly unreliable. Like, it got to a point that I felt like I was somehow doing the drifting wrong, or like there was some other trick to it. But as far as I'm aware, that's not the case. What you see is what you get. To clarify, I wouldn't say Chocobo GP has the worst gameplay feel out there. I've definitely played far worse kart racers in that regard. And honestly, I can definitely see how someone could find this gameplay fun. Maybe I've just gotten super critical after playing as many kart racers as I have, but for me at least, the controls and physics just didn't feel right. Now with that said, what exactly does the game offer beyond just, well, racing? You know, modes, characters, all that fun stuff. Well, starting with the characters, Chocobo GP's actually got a pretty solid roster, mixing together characters from the Chocobo spin-offs, caricatures of the summons, and characters from the mainline titles, as I mentioned earlier. Each character also has 3 variants of their vehicle, the other 2 being unlockable and emphasizing handling and speed. To no surprise, I largely played as Vivi, also known as the Best Boy. At the start of the game, you only have 3 playable characters: Chocobo, Sherma the White Mage, and Ben the Behemoth. All of you say nothing. But a majority of the roster is unlocked by playing through the story mode. There is one special secret character though. After you complete the story mode, you unlock expert difficulty for story mode, and by completing that, you get the secret character. Oddly enough, I actually found expert difficulty easier, since you could play as any character you wanted, while regular story mode would set which characters you could pick from based on story context. I could just power through all of story mode as my boy Vivi now, so I got through it really quickly. And my reward was none other than Cactuar. And just like in the original, he runs the race instead of driving. Though oddly enough, he's gone from being the slowest character to being the fastest character. Seems he really got into shape over the last 23 years. The last set of characters have their own method of unlocking, but we'll get to those. Now, while there's a nice variety of characters, I will admit that I feel the track lineup could be better. It does the Super Mario Kart thing where it fills up its track lineup with multiple tracks from the same handful of locations, but even Super Mario Kart got a bit more varied. Seriously, look at these big bridge tracks. These are supposed to be different tracks. Sure, it's cool to race in places like Zozo, Alexandria, and the Gold Saucer, but I feel like they definitely could have done a better job with their tracks. As for modes, Chocobo GP keeps it pretty simple. Alongside story mode, there's Grand Prix, custom races, think the standard versus mode in recent Mario Kart games, time trial, and multiplayer, which is specifically for playing with people on their own Switches locally or online. There is split-screen multiplayer for custom races and Grand Prix, but it's only 2-player. I don't know, it just feels weird for a kart race to not have 4-player split screen in 2022. Also, I'm sad they didn't bring back the relay race mode. That was the best mode in the original. And lastly, we have Chocobo GP. Great mode name. An online tournament mode in which you partake in multiple rounds of a 64-racer tournament, with the top 4 of each group of 8 moving forward until only 8 remain. I do like the idea of this mode. It's a pretty fun way to do an elimination-style competition, especially for online play. However, there's a lot more to this mode than just that, and... okay, it's time to address the elephant in the room. As I briefly made light of at the very start, Chocobo GP is a live service game, and boy does it embrace that notion. It's got everything. The battle pass, the microtransactions, the login bonuses, the multiple currencies, the pop-up ads advertising its premium content. It seriously feels like I'm playing a mobile game at times. But let me break this down more thoroughly. First, let's talk about that battle pass. By playing the online tournament mode, you'll get points for your Battle Pass level, which will give you access to additional content. Mostly Gil, one of the game's 3 currencies, and a few cosmetics, but also a playable character, which, in the case of this first Battle Pass, is none other than Cloud from Final Fantasy VII. But it's not as simple as just leveling yourself up to get all that stuff, no. As is commonplace with this practice, half of the Battle Pass, including Cloud, is locked off initially. To get the other half, you need to unlock it with Mithril, the game's premium currency. That is to say, the currency you need to spend real money to get. You do also get Mithril as login bonuses, but it's hardly much and is just there to push players to play every single day. Plus there's another catch with that, but I'll get back to that shortly. Now granted, the game gave players enough Mithril to get this first battle pass right away, a sort of thank you for buying this at launch gift, but I guarantee they will not be that generous for future battle passes. Because of that gift though, I was able to gain access to the full battle pass and try to get to level 60, which is when you'd unlock Cloud. Until I realized how slowly your level goes up. By the end of my first few sessions of play, having spent those previously mentioned few hours in the online tournament mode, I was only at level 11. Now that's not to say I was expecting this game to just give me Cloud on a silver platter. I knew grinding to level 60 was gonna take some time. But given I didn't care for the game as is, there was no way I was gonna keep playing through the online tournament mode for hours on end to get him. And Cloud's only a third through the battle pass. It goes up to level 200! Now granted, after the game launched, Square Enix announced they'd be patching the game to make the leveling process, quote, more forgiving. And while yes, it did feel a bit quicker than before, in my opinion at least, I'd hardly call it enough of an improvement to warrant me returning to the grind. So sadly, because of that, I never got to play as Cloud. But of course, the game does also offer a premium battle pass, which will send you straight to level 60 if you buy it instead of the regular one. But oops, Square Enix didn't give you enough Mithril to get that one. Guess you'll just have to buy the Mithril yourself. Yep, like I said, this game's got microtransactions, and these bundle prices are ridiculous. One of them costs more than the game itself. And I'd have less issue with all this if this were a free-to-play game, but it's not. Up here in Canada, the game costs $67. And Mithril's just one of 3 currencies. Like I mentioned earlier, there's also Gil, which can only be obtained from, where else? The online tournament mode. By completing specific challenges or by leveling up your battle pass, you'll get Gil, which can be used to purchase things like characters, vehicles, and color palettes. In this first season of content, Squall from Final Fantasy VIII can be bought with Gil. But with how little you often get Gil compared to how much items cost, you're once again urged to grind in the online tournament mode. The last currency, tickets, aren't tied to the online tournament mode though, being the only one you can get in any other mode. You get them either by completing extra missions in story mode, or by collecting crystals during races. You see what I mean about this feeling like a mobile game? The multiple currencies, the grindy nature, and again, on boot up, you get a pop-up advertising the battle pass. Classy. Oh, and get this. Apparently, Mithril can expire. Yeah, players found out that the free Mithril given, such as the login bonuses and the launch gift, expires after a few months if it's not used. Now granted, it was initially believed it was Mithril as a whole, but supposedly it's just the free Mithril. But even still, I have never heard of a premium currency expiring from not being used. That's just absurd. Now I know what some of you may be thinking. Didn't CTR Nitro Fuel do something like this? And isn't that one of your favorite games? Well, yes it did. But also, no it didn't. First off, CTR's seasonal content, the whole Battle Pass style meter you filled up, was free. Everyone had access to it. Everyone can unlock everything on it. No Battle Pass paywall at all. And unlike Chocobo GP, that binds leveling up to one specific mode, Nitro-fueled seasonal challenges had some variety. You weren't having to just play the same mode over and over and over again. Also, Nitro-fueled was a lot more generous when it came to completing the meter. It became a longer process for those last few rewards, yes, but getting the season's star character never took hours upon hours. Also, all the seasonal content got added to the regular shop afterwards, so anyone who missed the season could still get those rewards. Second, while it was absolutely scummy on Activision's part to patch in microtransactions post-launch, I am not defending that at all, the microtransactions were for the game's already existing currency. It's single currency. Again, I'm not defending the post-launch inclusion of microtransactions in Nitro Fueled. As much as I love the game, that decision was yikes. But looking at specifically how it's present in the game, it's tame compared to this mobile gamey grind that Chocobo GP's got going. And it's really a shame too, because Chocobo GP does have some areas where it shines. I didn't even mention stuff like the visuals, which do look pretty good, or the music, consisting of some fantastic remixes of classic Final Fantasy songs. The Melodies of Life remix on the Alexandria tracks in particular is superb. But yeah, despite those, I didn't really care for the gameplay, and its live service structure that expected me to either grind it out in gameplay I didn't really care for, or pay up to take the shortcut, ultimately killed it for me. Oh well, I've got plenty other kart races on the Switch to scratch that itch with. That first wave of Mario Kart 8 Deluxe's DLC is out now, so I'll probably be playing that. And with that said, I think it's about time to wrap this video up. This has been Black Mage Benjamin, and until the next video, have a nice day everybody.